yes, I did know Roger Patterson. Not well. As I mentioned earlier in the program, I had gone up to see him before the film was made. It was either in the spring or the fall. I'm thinking now it might have been more in the spring.
Please support this channel by subscribing and leaving comments.
Adjust your radio frequency. This is not a test. This is the Artist First Network. Cool.
Welcome to another edition of Bigfoot Central, exclusively on the Artist First Radio Network. Bigfoot Central is produced by Artist First World Radio to provide a forum where research, ideas, and information about the mysteries of Bigfoot can be freely exchanged. The views and opinions expressed on Bigfoot Central are not necessarily those of the host, our guests, or the owners of Artist First Radio. And now, from Bigfoot Command Central, it's Mr. Tony K.
And thank you very much, Z-Man, for that great introduction. And welcome, Bigfoot enthusiast worldwide, to another show of Bigfoot Central. And we're so excited. The response by our listening audience has been absolutely overwhelming. Thank you very, very much. We apologize for not being able to get to all of the email questions, but don't sweat it. We try to pick the cream of the crop whenever we can. And we really like having the type and quality of guests that have been on the program since January 1 of this year, and the response that we've received from you, the Bigfoot listener. Get out there in the chat rooms. Let everyone know tonight we have John Green, who's going to be sitting in the host chair tonight on Bigfoot Central. He's been on for a couple other hours in the past. We have his tapes available as a part of the Don Monroe Challenge. And if you haven't heard about that yet, we invite all of you to participate in supporting Bigfoot research and the efforts of Artist First, Bigfoot Central. So John Green is joining us this evening, and he has a guest. Jim McClarin is going to be joining John Green. So get out there on the World Wide Web. Let people know that Bigfoot Central is happening tonight. Send your emails to request@artistfirst.com. John and Jim, are you with us, guys?
Sure. This is Jim.
Welcome to the network. And John, are you there?
Yes.
Thank you for hosting tonight's program, John. And I'd like for you, John, to give a little bit of background. If you have a website for people to look at, I'd like for you to share that with the listening audience, and also you, Jim.
Well, I don't have a website.
Me neither. That about sums that up.
Well, you know, where do you call home, guys? How do you get the word out?
Well, I've written several books on the subject, and that's about it.
For myself, this is Jim. I was active for 9 years between 1963 and 1972, and then I got out of the field. But because I took part in some of the early investigation that is much talked about and analyzed today, I've been sought out for things things like this. So, I'm a
Welcome to
I'm
Bigfoot
kind of a
Central,
defunct
gentlemen.
Bigfoot expert, but still willing to talk about it. So,
Well, Jim, I'm not used to being the interviewer on these programs, but how did you get involved?
my first actual experience with reports of Bigfoot as anything other than just a tall tale around a campfire came in the form of Ivan T. Sanderson's book, Abominable Snowman, Legend Come to Life, which I found in the college library where I was going to school as a freshman in college. I went through the zoology section, and there in the zoology section was Ivan T. Sanderson's book. And read in there not only reports of the Yeti and the other hair-covered humanoids from around the globe, but many, many reports and accounts, analysis, Sanderson's analysis of what was going on in primarily the Pacific Northwest at the time.
So was this when you were at university in Arcata?
No, I actually went to a 2-year school for 3 years. And that was in Sacramento before I wound up at Humboldt State University, which at that time was just a state college, I have to admit.
Yes, but that brought you right into the area where things were happening.
One of the reasons I chose Humboldt State was that it was so close to the hub of the Bigfoot activity at that time, which was up in the area of Bluff Creek, which was where the Patterson film was made in 1967.
But you were already there before that, were you not?
I was there before that. I, in fact, had I had started organizing an expedition and to take part in the following summer. This is my first year at Humboldt State, and we did go out that summer looking to 3 other college students and I in an area not far from Bluff Creek. It was the creek system just to the north of Bluff Creek, Blue Creek. And while we were out there, an abundance of Bigfoot tracks were discovered on Onion Mountain, which was kind of overlooked both the Bluff Creek drainage and the Blue Creek drainage. We didn't know anything about it, though. But I guess you were there, weren't you, John?
Yes, Onion Mountain and Blue Creek Mountain, and that was just a few weeks before the film was made. But you may be talking about an earlier set. There were lots of tracks in that area in those days.
There was an earlier set, and my academic advisor from Humboldt State, or the chairman of the zoology department, went up and took a look at them, I believe, at that time.
I see. Okay, did you have any contact with Roger Patterson and Bob Gimlin at the time they were there and got the film?
Yes, I knew who they were. I had read Roger's book. In fact, I think he gave me a copy of his book. I'm not sure about that, but I went up to see Roger. I believe that you, no, it was either you or Ivan Sanderson had told me about Roger Patterson. And I made contact with him and several other investigators in the Pacific Northwest, and I went to see them by various means. Remember, I was a college student at the time and impoverished, so I often went by way of my thumb. I hold my thumb out and catch a sequence of rides to wherever I was going, and I had my backpack with me and my sleeping bag and everything. So I was prepared to rough it to some extent. And I visited Roger Patterson. Spent the night at his house, and he was just full of stories of reports of people having claimed to see large hair-covered human-like creatures, and many of them, amazingly enough, in the in the sagebrush areas of western Washington and Oregon, and including around Yakima. Yakima is not a heavily forested area, but according to Roger, these things there was evidence that these things were coming down into the apple orchards and eating apples at night, and then traipsing 20, 30 miles off to maybe spend the day in a brush-choked canyon someplace, and then returning the next night. And at that time, he had a very clear idea of how these things walked, and he demonstrated this for me. It sticks in my mind very clearly. The pronounced swinging of the arms, and kind of a slightly bent-kneed walk. He reasoned that the swinging of their arms enabled them to take bigger steps. I think that's probably correct.
How long would this be before you got the movie?
Oh, geez. I think it was a matter of months before. I think it was the prior fall or spring. I'm not sure just what time of year it was. There wasn't a lot of snow on the ground, but I think it was a little chilly, so it might have been either fall or spring.
Okay. And did you see him at all when he was down at Bluff Creek?
No, I didn't know he was coming to Bluff Creek. I didn't know anything about any documentary that he was filming. I was not, although I was in periodic contact with him, I guess I was not one of his regular contacts, and there'd be months between any contact with him. So it was a complete shock to me that he had been up Bluff Creek, and when I was notified by Al Hodgson, who ran the Willow Creek Variety Store, the following morning, the morning after he allegedly took the film, I was stunned. I didn't know he was there. I didn't know he had a camera. I didn't know they had the horses or anything.
So what did you do then?
As it turned out, by coincidence, Renee Hendon was in town either at the same time or shortly thereafter. And, of course, he was very excited as well. And Renee and I went up to the site, or near the site. We went up to the site where Bob Gimlin and Roger Patterson had camped with their horses, and we saw the horse droppings and the horse footprints, and where there had been some hay on the ground, I think. But, of course, by that time, they were gone. And we didn't know just where the filming was supposed to have occurred. So although we poked around a little bit, we didn't go up the creek far enough to actually get to the film site, and left without seeing any evidence of Bigfoot.
No doubt, though, that they had been there and been there for some time?
I don't recall determining that they had been there for some time, but certainly they had been there long enough to feed the horses and go up and down the road at least once, and leaving horse droppings behind. So
I see. And what did you do then?
Renee and I made plans to go up to Yakima, where we felt we would be able to see the film. And I'm not sure if we had any assurances that we would be able to view it at that time, but we won't. If we didn't have any assurances, we figured that we could talk our way into seeing it. We were not on the outs at all with Roger Patterson at that time, or in my case, any time since. But
so you did go to Yakima.
We took a plane out of McKinleyville, which is down on the coast, north of Arcadia and Eureka, up to Portland, and then from there, I think we caught another plane into Yakima, but I'm not sure about that. We might have ridden a bus up to Yakima from Portland. At any rate, we arrived there and were, I guess, taken to Al Diatley's house, where the film was run through several times, including a second reel of film in which they had filmed the sequence of tracks, of footprints there at the site that were reportedly left from the passage of Mrs. Bigfoot, or Patty, as researchers have come to call her.
So you're one of the few people that did see that second film.
I understand that a reel of film has been lost.
Yeah.
But I wasn't sure whether that was the one. I suspected it might be.
That's the one, yeah.
Okay.
And were you at the showing in Vancouver as well?
After Yakima, I went up to Vancouver, where there was a successful attempt made to round up a bunch of scientists to view the film and see what they thought. And that was kind of an experience. I remember going with Renee DeHenden to a radio station where we were both interviewed and about what we had seen of the film at Al Diatley's. This is before the viewing by the scientists, and then I attended the viewing at
University of BC.
UBC at Vancouver, I guess.
Right.
And again, my zoology advisor from Humboldt State had come to view the film. However, I was struck by the fact that this group of scientists was not really prepared to assess this film from a scientific standpoint. And as we have seen from the studies of the film since then, there are many, many measurements which were taken, which have been taken, and the film is, I'm sure there are many more things to be found in a simple study of the film, none of which was done there at that showing, yet the scientists who organized the whole thing made some sort of a nebulous pronouncement about the authenticity or lack thereof of the film. He didn't really condemn the film, but he didn't buy into it either. So, at least that's my recollection. How about you, John?
Yeah, that's correct. They were not at all going to accuse Roger or Bob Gimlin, whom we met for the first time in that period. I guess that's the first time we met him, because he wasn't at Al Diatley's when the movie was first shown there. And they weren't about to accuse them of hoaxing anything, but they figured it was somebody else in a suit. And when it was, I remember very clearly that when we pointed out that in that second film you could see that where the people were walking and even where the horses were, that they weren't making footprints anywhere near as deep as the footprints this creature had left. And the head honcho said, well, we don't have any proof of how hard the material was, you know, where one thing stepped and where another thing stepped. And it was pretty obvious they were all stepping on the same stuff. It was kind of a disappointing treatment, but then there's been lots more of that in the years since. I
think we've both found out more about science and scientists than we had known at that time in the intervening years.
And then I understand you were back at the film site that same year.
Just maybe like a couple weeks after, and it was in November. My memory of this event was hazy, and in fact I confused it with yours and my return to the site, which was actually the following summer. But
well, I remember very well that you had been there because I recruited you to come and act the part of the Sasquatch in a separate film, not just because you were over 6'5", but also because you had seen the path the footprints took while they were all still there. So I know you were there.
Yeah, but apparently while I was there, I'd gone in the company of two gentlemen. One, I believe, if I'm not incorrect, is Henry James. I had never met him before. I didn't know who he was. And the other was Bob Barnett, who was a radio personality. I'm not sure just what kind of radio show he had, but it might have been a radio newsman, or he might have worn several hats at a radio station in or near Eureka, California. But he wanted to go see the spot where this much talked about film had been made. I believe by that time he had interviewed me for a spot on the radio, but my memory's unclear about that. However, I did know who he was when he contacted me, and he rounded up Henry James, who had a four-wheel drive, and we went up there and went to the site, which this time I was able to recognize immediately when we got there because I'd seen the film. And we went up to the footprints, which had now by that time Bob Titmus had already been there and made his famous sequence of casts, or a cast of a sequence of footprints that show all sorts of foot flexion that you would not expect from a pair of wooden feet if the tracks were made by any of the methods claimed by people like Ray Wallace and so forth.
Yes, we all had taken to the showing at Vancouver all the footprint casts that various people had, and the scientists dismissed them as being much too perfect, and that wasn't what real animal tracks looked like. Of course, we had always been trying to cast prints that looked as if they would represent the actual shape of the feet. So it was because of that when Bob went back to the film site, he cast this continuous line of all these. Some of these tracks were a real mess, but they certainly showed plenty of movement. And of course, one of them is the most outstanding one that later convinced Dr. Jeff Meldrum, who's an expert in bipedal walking, that this thing actually can bend its foot in the middle, so that the heel isn't on the ground at all. Or in this case, it made a deep heel print, but then in front of that, it made a print of just the front half of the foot, leaving a great big hump in the middle, which is something that a human couldn't do.
Yeah, he and I had, in some ways, similar theories about that. I had formulated a theory that there was a kind of a flexing point in the foot at a certain place in the foot, the structure of the foot bones. And Meldrum said, no, it couldn't be there. It had to be someplace else. And I forget exactly the details of his theory, or mine either, for that matter. But at any rate, I saw the tracks there. Probably saw some pieces of plaster of Paris that were left over, picked off of the tracks or dribbled on the ground and so forth. Saw some human footprints. The sand was damp. There had been raining in the area. Certainly it had rained the night that the Patterson and Gimlin left with their horses. They were afraid of getting trapped in there, as I recall.
Yes, the roads were sliding in.
Yeah. In fact, that sand and gravel bar that Patty, the film subject, was filmed walking across was obviously the result of some big mudslide at some point, because it had filled in this canyon. There were dead trees out in the middle of this sand and gravel that probably had been buried several feet at least, and maybe many yards deep in the sand and gravel from some kind of big erosion incident. My theory is it was a big mudslide.
It may have been just the result of the huge flood they had there about 1964. I wasn't there at the time, but I remember seeing markings several feet above the normal level. I mean, that must have been a massive event. It must have swept all sorts of things into different shapes. Anyway, you're quite right. There was in some manner, a great deal of material had been laid down there and buried a lot of trees.
And they were dead at the time that the Patterson film was made, and we used those trees as many of them as markers in doing our triangulations when you and I later returned to the site. Mm-hmm. But anyway, let me continue with this visit that I made with Bob Barnett and Henry James to the site. Although my memory once again was fuzzy about this, a report was dug up that I had written in November of 1967, and it no doubt sent copies to you and to Renee DeHenden and probably to Ivan Sanderson and maybe some others. My speculations as a result of that visit, I had from seeing the film, I thought I could tell about where the film was made. That is, about where the camera was when the film was made. And it turns out I was completely wrong. I had thought that Patterson would have had to have been standing up on top of a log. And so anyway, I had with me either an 8mm or a Super 8 camera that I had one of the other two gentlemen take a film of me with, and also I think that I must have filmed the sequence of tracks similar to the film that Patterson and Gimlin had made following the filming of Mrs. Bigfoot. And apparently I sent that film to you. If so, then your memory is also very fuzzy or completely shot on this, because although I got a letter from you mentioning something about a film that you were slow in returning to me, I don't recall ever getting the film back, or don't recall sending it in the first place. And
I don't recall getting it.
but the best evidence that I did all this was in this report that I had sent out. I think at that time it was carbon copies. I only made 5 or 6 carbon copies on the typewriter and sent them out. Daniel Perez had gotten his hands on a copy of this and sent it to me. So I was indebted to him for that, because as I say, I just I was blurring the two events together. Yours on my trip and my trip with the other two guys. But this trip was in November, just probably a couple weeks after the film was made, and the tracks were still fairly fresh there. Even the ones that Bob Gimlin had made casts of, Bob Titmus had made casts of, still showed the basic Bigfoot track shape.
Mm-hmm.
And because I had seen that sequence of tracks and I knew where the tracks went, I was deemed to be valuable in making the reenactment film that you shot.
Yes, because that was in the following July, and some of the tracks still showed, but unfortunately none of them right where the good frames of the creature walking were.
So at any rate, when you and I visited the following summer, I was not only the guide but the model. And what you did was take slides, which you had taken.
Yes, I had slides from the film.
The Patterson-Gimlin film, and by holding these slides up and examining the area, probably through the viewfinder of your camera as well, you were able to tell, well, if I hold the camera here, then these trees line up closer to what's in the slide, and you kept going at it until you had, within, I would say, a matter of inches, frontwards, backwards, up and down, side to side, of just where Patterson had been holding his camera through the best part of the Patterson-Gimlin film of Bigfoot.
Yeah, it was quite fascinating because the part where he's close to the animal, he's only a couple of feet off the ground. He was either kneeling or squatting or something. And then there's a lot of scrambled film, and then the thing is a long way off, and we always thought that he had moved in that period, but it turned out he was at the same place, but he was now standing up. And that's how closely you could line things up doing that. So I've always been quite sure that the only thing in that film of you walking that prevents it from being an absolutely accurate way of determining the height of the thing is that you may have been a little farther or a little closer in relation to the camera as you went by.
It's my contention that I was a little further away from the camera because based on the depressions in the sand that appeared to be right where the Bigfoot tracks had been the preceding fall, I had established where the trail was, the trail of footprints, and I walked just to the outside of that. I didn't walk on the tracks themselves or on the depressions themselves, but I walked as close to them as I could without getting into the depressions. So I was a matter of maybe 6 or 8 inches further away from the camera than Mrs. Bigfoot had been from Roger Patterson's camera.
If you're just joining us this evening, gentlemen, for new listeners logging on, our host this evening for Bigfoot Central is John Green, and his guest is Jim McClarin. Thank you, gentlemen.
Anyway, we've gone over what your experience has been, and to some extent what mine has been with Roger Patterson. Of course, in the intervening years and right up until today, people keep popping up claiming that they know how the film was faked, or they were even involved in faking it. What's your opinion on that subject?
My feeling then, as it is now, is that the film would be very, very difficult to fake. It would require a high degree of technical expertise that to date nobody has demonstrated publicly. Nobody has shown us how the film could be produced with anything other than a Sasquatch. It could have been a person in a fursuit, but the person would have to have very unusual limb proportions, as you have recently pointed out. The arms are longer in proportion to the legs in the Patterson film subject than is the case for probably 99-point-something% of humans. Maybe all humans, who knows? Maybe somebody with atrophied legs that had polio or something. But the thing that impressed me most about the film at the time, when I didn't know what the size was, because we had nothing to compare it to. The only gauge of the size, I guess, was the footprints that were not excessively large. They're about 14 and a half inches long, I think, 14 and a quarter, somewhere in there. And the creature in the film, or the film subject, moved in a way that with a fluidity that suggested ponderous mass. You can't take a ponderous mass and quickly redirect its direction. So there's this fluidity of motion. If you've ever seen a film of a giraffe running, that would be an extreme case. A giraffe is not jerky. A giraffe has very fluid motions. The giraffe galloping it almost seems like it's running in slow motion, but it's covering a lot of ground. But it didn't remind me of the giraffe so much as a grizzly bear or a Kodiak bear, films that I've seen of them, that might be galloping across the terrain. The arms, in particular, swung out and then swung back as it was kind of pumping its arms as it walked, with a fluidity that has not been present in other films that I've seen that are supposedly a Bigfoot. I know our old friend and nemesis Ray Wallace claimed to have shot some, I think, 16,000 feet of movie film of Bigfoot doing various things, and he showed me one reel of his film of Bigfoot. It might have been the only reel he had, but whatever, I'm convinced it was his brother Shorty in the costume, because it moved just like Shorty, who I also knew. In fact, I'd met Shorty before I'd met Ray. Shorty's real name was Wilbur, but everybody called him Shorty, who knew him. And the movements were very jerky in that film of an obvious human in a fursuit. And you didn't see any, instead of a nice separation between the gluteus maximi, which has been much talked about recently in the discussions about the film's authenticity. This is Patterson film's authenticity. This particular Bigfoot that Ray Wallace was touting actually had a tail that swung back and forth stiffly as the thing moved around. So I guess it was a broomstick stuffed inside of a furry sleeve, and it was just attached who knows how. But this was not the wily Bigfoot that is able to escape detection by darting into the brush and slipping behind a tree.
Well, if you'll pardon my saying so, in the comparing the movie that Patterson took and the movie that I took, your movements are pretty jerky too.
Yeah, I imagine they are. I've seen the film.
Well, we humans, we go up over a stiff leg every time we take a step, so we bob up and down. And this thing just flows along with the knee bending as the weight goes over it. It's a totally different walk.
So when you filmed me, and I figured I was about 6'5" or 6'5¼ in the boots I was wearing at the time. In my bare feet, 6'4¼ but I was walking basically up on the surface of the sand, sinking in, maybe 1/8 of an inch, certainly no more than 1/4 inch at any place. And these footprints, I estimated, or kind of guesstimated, that they were about 1 inch average depth in the sand. That they'd been made in damp sand at the time, and held their shape long enough for Bob Titmus to come along and make some pretty good casts of them. Thanks in part probably the fact that I think Patterson and Gimlin covered some of the better tracks with cardboard or pieces of bark or something to try to protect them from the rain that was...
Bob covered them with bark.
Yeah. Anyhow, Patty was walking down in her footprints there, presumably. So she would have been about 1 inch lower than me, and so...
Yes, and her knees were bent, and she was somewhat stooped over.
Yep. So you compare the two films, and we were similar in height, although I think Patty was just a little bit taller than me in the frames that were superimposed on each other.
That's right. You can argue about it, but basically I would say that she's got 1 inch or 2 on you, even though she's got her knees bent and she's sinking farther into the ground.
So the upward estimate was as I recall, perhaps as much as 7 feet if you straighten the body out, and certainly 6'7" or so at a minimum.
Yeah, I don't think you could even consider a range of getting down towards 6 feet. I think the minimum would have to be 6'3", 6'4", and the maximum maybe 7 feet. My own opinion is about 6'8", 6'9".
Gentlemen, I'd like, if you allow me, to jump in quickly with an email. Hi, Jim and John. Nice to hear this show. You guys are truly the historically important dynamic duo in Bigfoot analytic history, and 2 of my favorite people in the field. You are talking about the Patterson-Gimlin footage, good, and of course your recreation film is significant and important to the investigation of that film. I have a couple of short questions each that people talk a lot about on the net, and I hope you can answer them tonight. For Jim, how tall were you in 1967? Do you recall leaning over during the recreation film? For John, how tall were you in 1967? Did you take your film of Jim while you were standing, leaning, running, or were ever down on your knees? Thank you, and best wishes, your friend, Lauren Coleman.
Well, hello to Lauren. I'll go first if that's okay with you, John.
Sure.
As we just recently mentioned, I was 6'4¼ in my bare feet, but in the boots I was wearing at the time, I was 6'5" or 6'5¼ I would estimate that the boot heels were 3/4 to an inch high. Not a high heel boot by any means, but it did add some to my height. And I was not intentionally leaning forward, but I do have somewhat of a stooped posture. Have had for many years, and so I suppose you could give me a couple demerits for that. It was Was I as stooped as Mrs. Bigfoot was?
No, you weren't.
I couldn't really say.
Okay, I'm about an inch shorter than Jim, but that really doesn't have anything to do with it because, one of the things that was the most exact was that I had the camera at the same height that Rogers was. I don't remember whether I was kneeling or what I was doing, but that was one of the things we went down there to determine, was just where the camera had to be.
I remember you being in kind of a crouched or kneeling position as you were filming. But where you had determined the camera had to be through triangulation from the slide outtakes from the film.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I think we covered that.
Thank you, gentlemen. I have another email. I'll attempt to get to it quickly. It's rather lengthy. I had recently given a series of questions to another researcher who presented them to Mr. Long a few nights ago at a Bigfoot meeting. After Mr. Long had ridiculed the researchers in the Bigfoot field for accepting the Patterson film without investigating the facts properly, he was asked the question why it was that if the alleged man in the suit was said to have helped stage this film in the month of May, then why is the tree foliage on the film in autumn colors, which comes in October in the Bluff Creek area? Long replied that he had no answer for that. One would think if someone was confessing to an event to an author, that the main facts of the event would want to be checked to see if the story has merit. And Mr. Long didn't seem to even have done the basics in his investigation. When Mr. Long was asked if he had experienced the noise level at the film site due to the water running over the rocks in the stream, he again said he didn't have an answer for that. Having been at the film site myself, I can say that the noise level of the creek would prevent anyone from hearing someone say the word cut, even at a fraction of the distance the creature was from Patterson when the film finally ended. Again, this was not something Mr. Long didn't think too important to be sure his information source was legit. It seems that Mr. Long's book did little more than to show how poorly he had actually
without anything else, destroy any idea that this man who's claiming to have been in the suit was involved at all. I believe it's September that he claimed the film was made, but in any event, he's got the wrong month. The colors make it quite obvious that it's late fall. And the other thing is, he says that he just did a short walk and then he stopped when he heard Roger say cut. Well, the thing was hundreds of yards away from Roger by the time Roger ran out of film. So he doesn't know the first and most basic things about it. It's just another yarn spinner. It's certainly not the first one. Greg Long's problem is that he was absolutely sure that the whole thing was a hoax, and he spent all his time trying to dig up dirt on Roger, and never bothered to really check at all. And he actually thinks he found this person, and doesn't seem to know that he's been telling this yarn for a long time before, trying to make money from it for a long time before, and it's just a lot of nonsense. And the idea that anybody actually published a book in which claimed to have found the person who wore the costume, who says it was a horsehide suit in 3 pieces, and also claims to have found the man who made the costume, who says it was made out of modern materials in 6 pieces. The whole thing it's really just a comedy.
That doesn't seem to hang together too well.
I would like to also thank the next emailer. We've covered some of this ground, but I'll mention it anyway. Jim, thanks for coming on the show. I have 2 questions. Could you tell us if you knew Roger Patterson, and what do you think of him? And did you uncover any evidence that the Patterson film was a hoax when you investigated it? Thanks, Gene from Vermont.
No, I never uncovered any evidence that the film was a hoax. I never fully believed that it was a Sasquatch, but that's more of a philosophical position because I don't think it's scientific to fasten yourself onto some idea and say this is it. I don't care what else. Whatever comes in over the transom, I'm going to ignore because I've found the truth. That's not very scientific. Even though many scientists kind of practice that in reverse, they disbelieve. We found this particularly with reference to Bigfoot. They believe in the non-existence of Bigfoot, so it's hard to shake them from that. But I don't think that belief is a scientific approach. But yes, I did know Roger Patterson, not well. As I mentioned earlier in the program, I had gone up to see him before the film was made. It was either in the spring or the fall. I'm thinking now it might have been more in the spring of '67. And I hitchhiked up there. This might have even been during my Easter break that I went up to see him, because I was a student at nearby Humboldt State College at the time, now Humboldt State University. I'd gone up there and spent overnight at Patterson's. They put me up in a guest bed, or maybe showed me a spot on the floor to roll my sleeping bag out. I forget what, but Roger, I called Roger when I got into Yakima from a phone booth, and he came out and picked me up, brought me back, and we stayed up late. He was telling me all sorts of stories, reports that he had gotten from different people, and just he seemed very, very excited, keyed up about the whole business, and delighted in telling me about it. Showed me how he thought that these things walked according to descriptions, and exposed me to reports from areas that I had not previously heard reports from, and to reports of colors I had not heard reported before. He said that there were people reporting that there were beige-colored Bigfoots, big feet, Sasquatches, in some of the reports. I don't know how many reports there might be in the great body of reports. John, you would know better than I about that. What percentage would you say are beige or gray or light colored?
Oh, the light color ones maybe about 10%.
Okay. And at that time, Roger told me he had Hodgkin's disease, but he was fighting it with various vitamins and herbs and things, and he was been working on his body strength, and as I recall, he showed me how he was able to do a one-armed pull-up. Something I've never been able to do. One of the unusual things he did was explain how he had this weird fact about him that his feet did not stink, and to prove it, he pulled off his cowboy boot and said, "Here, smell this." And so I sniffed his cowboy boot and it smelled like nice new leather. Nope, his feet apparently didn't stink. Whether this was related to Hodgkin's disease or all the herbs he'd taken, or whether he'd been born like this and been that way all his life, who knows? But He was quite a character, and he impressed me as being a little bit on the carny side. And this may be because of his association with the rodeo circuit. He was a big rodeo rider. I know I just pronounced that word two ways, but that's common. When you're raised in the Southwest, where it's rodeo, and I guess the Northwest is rodeo. I met his family. He has several kids and his wife, and he was both impressive and as I say, a little bit carny, or a little bit kind of like a used car salesman. Very, very avid talker. He could really pull you in on things. I think he had the ability to pull people into stories or subjects, I guess. I found his enthusiasm for the Bigfoot subject very infectious. Not that I wasn't already excited about it, but that he filled me full of all kinds of visions of what these things are like.
Yeah, I knew him somewhat better than that, and then got to know him very well afterwards. And certainly it's possible to dig up people that have a low opinion of him for one reason or another, but in my experience, he was absolutely genuine on this subject. And indeed, people imagine he made a great deal of money from the film. Well, he didn't. But what he did make, he spent again in trying to find a Sasquatch again. And he had Hodgkin's disease. He had cobalt treatment. Had a good remission at the time you knew him, and was certainly in tremendous shape at that time. And he never did believe he was dying, almost up to the day he actually died. But at the time he got the film, he was in excellent health.
He was, I would say, a positive thinker in the extreme. I never heard anything negative out of Roger.
Anyway, is that...
Well, gentlemen, thank you so much for sharing your personal insights and for standing by such good investigative research. Of course, people like Mr. Long have always existed in the area of Bigfoot. Some have said it's unfortunate that the name Bigfoot has been attached to Sasquatch, the forest giant, that maybe some other term would have been more suitable for the research and preservation of this creature. And it's unfortunate that people are out there to discredit those of good will and of good knowledge. And I think it's indicative in the Bigfoot field. If you have an experience in the wild and you actually see a forest giant, you're not real eager to tell people about it because of the publicity that can come, the ruin to your life, to your credibility, because you have stood up and said, hey, I've actually witnessed a Bigfoot, a Sasquatch myself, and now the world will look at you with skeptical eyes. And people like Mr. Long and others in Bigfoot history have attempted to capitalize on that through the hoax side of the issue.
That's very true about people's reticence to come forward. I've talked to a number of people, and John probably many more, that might have told their friends, and their friends laughed at them and said that, oh, you must have been drinking, and or they told their wife, and she used that as some excuse to make them sleep on the couch that night or something. And they just shut up after that, and they really had to be coaxed to tell their stories. They were not out looking for publicity or fame or glory or anything because of the way people have treated their stories.
Are we cutting into somebody else's time here? Or?
Yes, and I want to once again thank John Green and Jim McClarin for being our guests this evening on Bigfoot Central. The hour travels so quickly, but join us next week, every Tuesday at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for Bigfoot Central. And we encourage you to stay engaged, to support Bigfoot research through the associations in your area. And we invite your questions or comments to request.
Enjoying all this rare and unique content, please show your support by subscribing and leaving comments.